Shalom, this is Rabbi Sachs. Welcome to the Chai Academy, and welcome back to the Chai Academy if you've been here before. There's been a short hiatus due to my sister's passing, and now that Shiva's over, we will begin again, resume, I guess, the classes and the courses. So the Chai Academy, we discuss many different things of topics of interest, and various topics of interest, and we've been discussing lately. We've been discussing the modern day Israel, and we've gone through presidents, we've gone through inner fightings and struggles, etc., and we've gone through independence and pre-independence and Balfour declarations and white papers, the shameful white paper, and etc., etc. Today, the lesson is billed as the Six-Day War and the Green Line. So, of course, the Six-Day War took place in June 1967. Now, in May 1967, it was obvious that there was going to be a war. It wasn't the Jews making. It was a number of Arab nations that bordered Israel decided that they are strong enough, united enough, and they're going to war with Israel. It was a very sad and bleak time for the Jews in Israel because they felt, this truly is a collaborative effort, and they will. It's strong army. It's not just one army; it's many armies. And what's interesting is that June, 1 month later, when the war started and ended in June, it was one of the happiest times, and so you went from sadness to happiness, right? All in a period of a few weeks. The saddest time, the happiest and proudest moments of modern day Israel history. By the time the war was over, Israel was 4 times as big as it was before the war started, right? And way more territory, and as we'll discuss as we progress. Now, it is true that Israel did a preemptive strike, but truth be told, it wasn't really preemptive, because the bordering Arabs, and the main one, the leader of the pack, was General Nasser of Egypt, right? He and others, Hussein from Jordan, and Iraq was involved, and Syria was involved, and so they got together, and they said, you know what, we can do it this time. So we failed a couple of previous wars, but this war we can win. We absolutely can win. We've gained superiority. So they tried something. This is all in May. So in May, I think it was May 22nd, they closed the Straits of Tiran. So, which is, by the way, which is an illegal act. It was they weren't allowed to. Basically, what they were seeking to do was the Straits of Tiran is where a lot of commerce, and Israel thrived off the Straits of Tiran, but Egypt, under the direction of Nasser, they closed it off, and that was actually considered an act of war, a legal act of war. Israel didn't react. They showed restraint. And we see a powerful lesson from here. Egypt showed restraint. They were asked to show restraint. They're continually asked to show restraint. The Arabs, Nasser, right, he took it as a sign of weakness, not as strength. He didn't see it as, okay, they don't want to go to war with us. We really could talk this out. They said, aha! They showed signs of restraint because because they are weak. So Nasser was convinced, and he made an alliance with the other Arab bordering armies. War was imminent. So the foreign minister of Israel, Abba Eban, right? And if you remember him, Dr. Eban went to France, and he met with Charles de Gaulle, and he begged, he implored. He says, "You have an influence on the, at that time." It was at that moment, kind of, when Israel and France, lost their warmth with one another. So he went to Charles de Gaulle, and he said, he asked the premier, the prime minister, he says, please, please, we don't want to go to war. De Gaulle basically said two things, which I mean, Iban left empty-handed. He said, "Wow, you really speak an eloquent French. I'm really impressed with your dialect and your knowledge, vocabulary." And he said, "Don't make war. Don't go to war. I'm warning you." So the rhetoric started to heat up. So May 27th, you had Nasser. He says, we're going to destroy Israel. And then you had Iraq. He's saying, we're going to wipe them off the map. And Israel and Syria, they made it. I'm sorry, Egypt and Syria, so south and north, they made a deal. They're going to attack. Egypt and Jordan, strengthened their alliance. They said they're going to attack. Actually, Nasser flew to Jordan, right? And they said, okay. And they started to strategize exactly when they were going to attack Israel. Iraqi army started to pour into Jordan. Right, so here you had three bordering states plus additional armies pouring into them, and with the hopes of destroying and wiping Israel off the map. Israel, when they saw the war was imminent, they quickly called up the reservists. We discussed this before, and every abled person, every able-bodied male from 18 to 55 were called up to fight in the war. Right? It basically had such a tremendous deleterious effect on the economy, because now you had anybody from 18 to 55 who was male was not working, was not part of the workforce, and the drums of war, were beating. Eshkol, who was the prime minister, Levi Eshkol at that time, he was not only was the prime minister, he was also he was also in charge of defense, etc. And he actually developed a stutter during this time. He was aging, and developed a stutter, which the Israeli people, they were nervous. They said, you know what, he can't do everything. And he can't be the prime minister, diplomacy, and he can't be the minister of war and defense. He can't. So they begged him, please bring General Moshe Dayan out of retirement. We discussed Moshe Dayan in a previous class. So bring the General Moshe Dayan. He was considered the general of Israel. He had only recently retired a couple of years back. And he went to growing tomatoes, etc., cherry tomatoes to be specific, and archaeology, right? If you recall, he was a major archaeologist. He dabbled in it. So Eshkol acquiesced, and he finally brought back Moshe Dayan. And he said to him, you're in charge. You're in charge. As soon as Moshe Dayan was appointed, Dayan acted. And it was a preemptive strike that probably was the greatest thing Dayan did for the state of Israel. What he did is he destroyed, on the same time, he destroyed the Egypt's Air Force. So all the planes were on the ground, right? The Israeli Air Force attacked, and basically they grounded the Air Force of Egypt. They grounded Syria's planes, right? And so they took that. So now Egypt and Syria had no air power. Nothing. Israel still did not want to go to war. So Israel asked the UN to intervene and please, go to Jordan, speak to Jordan, and ask Jordan not to get involved in this fight. You pull with now the UN is useless and always has been useless, and it's not recently been useless, but it's been useless for I've always maintained personally that they should take that beautiful property right on the water, turn it into condominium, and you'll be better served. Can you imagine you could put the homeless there? That would be amazing. You know how many homeless you could help instead of all this nonsense that goes on in the UN. Anyway, so Jordan, the UN did not get involved, or if they did, they were completely non. It changed nothing. It changed nothing. So Jordan didn't get involved, and instead, the Hussein, the king of Jordan, started to get more and more vocal, and he said things like this: It is incumbent on every single person to kill a Jew. Kill them with a bullet. Kill them with your bare hands. Kill them with your nails. I don't care how you do it, but kill them. And anyway, and the war began. The war didn't go well. Once again, they had no air support, and there was tough fighting. So, a very famous story, which was just shows how your mother always told you, right, or your teacher always told you, tell the truth, and it'll be better for you, right? The truth is the truth will always prevail. So what happened? It's a fascinating story. Nasser called Hussein. So basically, the general Nasser of Egypt called Hussein of Jordan, and he said, you know what, the war's not going well, and this is embarrassing for us. So why don't we say something like this? Why don't we say the reason why the war's not going well is because United States and the United Kingdom are behind Israel. So they were having this discussion. Unbeknownst to both of them, Israel was spying on their conversation. Somehow, Israel was able to tap into, back in 1967, conversation of these two, prime ministers or kings, leaders of the country, which, you got to believe that they should have been a secure line, scrambled line, right? They were able to tap in. So then Nasser, the conversation went something like this. Nasser said to Hussein, should we say the United States and England, or should we just say the United States? So Hussein said, no, say both. Say United States and England are interfering, and that's why the war's not going right for us. Right? So they came out in all the papers that the United States and England, all the Arab papers said the United States and England are helping Israel in the war, and therefore it's not fair. You have these huge countries helping them in the war, and the United States is biased, United Kingdom is biased, and all Arab countries severed ties with the United States at that time, except Jordan. King Hussein knew the truth, that it wasn't the case. Shortly thereafter, it was in the papers, Israel released the tape. Israel released the tape, and there was a clear recording between Nasser and Hussein, and they had egg on their face, and Hussein actually apologized. He made a public apology for having said what he said, and that he lied. And he did like he fell on his sword because he was caught in the bold-faced lie. So this war was a very short war, right? It was called the 6-Day War for a reason. It took place in 6 days. Immediately on the first day, the Sinai Peninsula was captured by Israel. So the Sinai Peninsula basically is you think of Israel to the south, it ends in Eilat, and then there's Egypt. So between south of Eilat was an area of land, a big area of land that Israel captured. And they actually made it as almost like a buffer for many, many years. And it was given back in the Camp David Accords with Jimmy Carter and oh no, was it Jimmy? Yeah, I think it was Jimmy Carter. Was it Jimmy Carter? I don't remember when they gave it back, but I think it was Jimmy Carter's times. So the Sinai Peninsula, so Israel actually, if you look at an older map before whenever it was, the 80s, Israel actually had a different shape than it has now. Now it comes down to a point. It used to come down, with a good chunk of land. So immediately they gained a stronghold in the Sinai Peninsula. A couple days later, right, the Israelis captured the West Bank. That was had by Jordan. Now, once again, if you remember from our previous class, Jordan had there was an agreement, and there was West Jordan and West Jerusalem and East Jerusalem, etc. And Israel had and Jordan had the West Bank, and Jordan had Jerusalem. Jordan had the old city of Jerusalem, rather, and Jordan agreed with the armistice to allow the Jews to come to the old city, which they didn't allow one time, from 48 to 67, 49 to 67. Not one Jew was given permission to go to the old city, but on this day it was conquered. They conquered the West Bank, which we don't call the West Bank, we call Judea and Samaria. We don't call it occupied territories. They do, but this is Judea and Samaria, is where all our history is. All our history, every bit of our history. So it was captured from Jordan. Now, they lost many lives in Jerusalem itself. Once again, West Jerusalem was where the Jews lived. East Jerusalem, where the old city was, and beyond is where the Arabs lived. So they conquered East Jerusalem, they conquered the old city. But they lost many lives in the old city because Israel refused to shell the old city with artillery. They refused to just bomb it. Because for Israel, this is where the Holy Temple was. This is where the Western Wall is still standing, and to stop blowing it up, one renegade bomb and the Western Wall's down. So Israel, they preferred hand-to-hand combat with guns, etc., but no munitions, no bombs or grenades or anything like that. And they suffered great losses. So they gotten the Sinai Peninsula Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, which they gave back. They got Jordan. They beat Jordan, and they got the Judea and Samaria, which includes Jerusalem. They got that, and they have not relinquished. Now there has been negotiations, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But they got back the old city. That famous picture of General Dayan and Yitzhak Rabin and Uzi Narkis coming to the wall, etc. The hardest one to beat was Golan. Because Golan, Israel was fighting uphill, literally. So the Golan was overlooking Israel. It was owned by Syria. And it was very, very strategic. Very strategic because it was the high ground. So the Golan was the hardest, but they did get the Golan. And they got the Golan. Now the Golan, the pressure to get back the Golan could never happen, because you never, ever, the Golan is such a strategic position, and you can see the entire Syria, you can see a lot of Israel. They set up watchtowers there, and never again will they be caught fighting uphill. So, and in fact, I think the previous administration, under President Donald J. Trump, I believe there was an agreement signed that the Golan is they will not put that anymore on the negotiating table. which makes sense. But the Golan was the hardest, and it was won. And but through this war, for such a small country, 680 or 89 lives were lost. It was horrific loss for the amount of people. Now, so Israel now had gotten, once again, from Egypt, from Syria, and from Jordan. Syria to the north, Jordan, they got east, so away from the shores of Tel Aviv. And if you drive, over, that's, Judea and Samaria, and likewise all the way down the coast, to Judea, Samaria to the west of that. So all those territories that they got, right, were considered outside the Green Line. So the UN refused to recognize. Good day to all. The UN refused to recognize anything beyond the Green Line. So the borders from 48 to 67 is called the Green Line, and the borders of 67 and on is considered beyond the Green Line. And the negotiations are, and even former Prime Minister Barack Hussein Obama, he once said, he made a faux pas, and he once said that, I think it was by an AIPAC, or I'm not sure when it was, he had to retract, but he said, why don't we start renegotiate? Why don't we just sit down with the Arabs and use the Green Line as a beginning point of negotiations? That's not what is going to happen. That's not what should happen. You start a war, you try and annihilate people and a country, you lose the war, and then you complain. Right? Forget about our historic attachment to Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria, where all the tribes lived, etc. Forget about our attachment to it. You cannot, and these are the rules of engagement, start a war, and then lose the war and say, okay, so everybody, backsies. No, you can't do that. And so that's what's called the Green Line. It's something I disagree with. Is the JNF does tremendous work in Israel. They plant trees and they forestry and water and et cetera. Amazing organization. However, they don't plant trees on the other side of the Green Line. To me, that's such a political statement, and I disagree with them vehemently, angrily. This is Jerusalem. You don't want to plant trees in the old city of Jerusalem, or because you don't want to upset the Arabs. They too need trees and water. So I don't know. It's just political, and what it does is legitimizes the Arab claim. So I'm really not. I love the work they do, and but I disagree with their politics. Israel, instead of having now, because they have these 3 new territories, instead of having the Arab population 15%, the Arab population went up to 40%. Israel wasn't worried. They said, you know what? It's over. They've lost. Let's move on, and we'll strengthen security, and let's hope we can all live together. He says, but in August, all the Arab nations came together in Khartoum, and they voted on it, and it was passed. The famous 3 no's. The 3 no's are: no peace with Israel, right? No negotiations with Israel, and no recognition of Israel. So we wouldn't even recognize it. No, and until today, you see it. The Palestine. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. They're referring to all of Israel, because they won't call it Israel; they'll call it Palestine. So it's very hard to have peace with someone that doesn't recognize your existence. It's very hard to have peace with somebody who won't negotiate with you, right? So that was a problem. However, what the 1967 war, the 6-Day War, did is it raised Jewish awareness. First, it was a miracle, right? It was amazing victory. Secondly, is that wow, we got the old city back. We have Jerusalem back. We have the wall back. The UJA raised in 1967 three times as much as they raised in 1966. It was because there was such an awareness. Jews began moving to Israel in 1967 after this happened, right? And there was a Soviet exodus after that occurred, right? And basically, the Jews at that time, it was an extremely proud moment, and it was a time where we say, "Wow, we can now go back into the temple, and we can go to the cave of the patriarchs. We can go to different places that we were never allowed to go. We have security in our borders, and that's how it has to, and that's how it really has to be." So the awareness of Israel throughout the globe was heightened. Um, it was heightened in a positive sense. Right. So correct. So you're correct, Susan. So Barack Obama, he wanted to go back to negotiations beginning at the Green Line. That means give back everything, and now you negotiate. That was a bad political move. Who knows what lurked in his heart there. Um, but that's so right now, right now, the Sinai Peninsula is given back to Israel, given back to Egypt. There is peace. There is peace between Egypt. Um, there is peace in Egypt, between Egypt and Israel. I think Sadat was a true leader, paid for his life with it, but he was a true leader, and he said it's better. There should be, how many more people are going to be killed? So he made peace, and true peace, and it's held anyway, and they got so they got that back. The Golan will never get back. It's impossible to give it back. It's too dangerous to give it back. And so and as far as the Judea and Samaria, so there are different zones that were negotiated. The A zone, the B zone, the C zone. So certain zones, certain places are controlled by Arabs only. They have their own Palestinian Authority, their own police, etc. They control and the Mossad and etc. Their people deal together about what's going on in those territories. Some are Jewish territories in the West Bank, Efrat, and you have Mala Adumim, and you have you have plenty, Hebron, etc. And that seems to be a stuck in the craw of the Arabs. They did try and do an exchange. For this city we'll give you this city, for this city we'll give you this city, but it didn't go anywhere. On Arafat, he was given most of what he asked for, 98%, and he backed out. The old city of Jerusalem is under Jewish rule, Israeli rule, and the Arabs are allowed to worship in the mosque. In fact, they control the mosque, and they they're allowed up there, and which is a great deal more than they did when they controlled it. Because when they controlled it, not one Jew was allowed to go. Forget onto the Temple Mount. Wasn't even allowed to go into old Jerusalem, the old city of Jerusalem. So Israel is really trying to be very fair when it comes to this type of stuff. It will never be given back. Jerusalem is, and people can say what they want. It's off the table. It's just off the table. So you want to talk about two-state? Jerusalem can be an international city. Guess what? It is an international city, right? It's going to be run by Israel because for security reasons. But you tell me, that's not an international city. You have the Christians, the Muslims, and the Jews, and the born agains and the Adventists. They from all over the world. They come, and Jerusalem is the highlight. So So that would never be, that would never ever be transformed. With all Yitzhak Rabin's being a dove, and said he was, talking about giving back land, giving back land, giving back land, and he was assassinated by a fellow Jew. He never gave back land. He spoke about it, but the bottom line is he never did it. He never did it. Arik Sharon removed the Jews from Gaza, and he was always the hawk. But he removed himself from Gaza unilaterally. So it's complicated, but remember, the Green Line is not complementary to Israel. It's not complementary to the Jewish people, and the Green Line borders are just unsafe, and it's untenable. This class has been given in memory of my sister, Chaya Chana, of blessed memory. May her soul be elevated to heights beyond our imagination. God bless. This class is recorded. You can see it at the Chai Academy. That would be thechaicenter.com/academy. Thanks.